Hello! Welcome to my channel where it's all about the history. This information was compiled by historian Ed Francis, and as always, the source material can be found at the end of the video. This vehicle is the M551 Armored Reconnaissance and Airborne Assault Vehicle General Sheridan, or just Sheridan for short. It was named after the Civil War Union General Philip Sheridan. The vehicle is often called a light tank, or thought to be the spiritual successor to the M24 Chaffee and M41 Walker Bulldog, but in fact was quite different in role, doctrine, and design. The US had made sweeping changes to its tank program following a tripartite meeting in November 1950, and replaced the old classification of light, medium, and heavy tanks based on weight, with a new system based on caliber. These would typically be 76mm for light tanks, 90mm for medium tanks, and 120mm for heavy tanks. At the time, the M24 Chaffee was coming to the foreseeable end of its service life, and the M41 Walker Bulldog was the current light tank of the US forces. Although the M41 had done relatively well in Korea, it was also too large and heavy for airdrops, and a little too slow and noisy for a true reconnaissance tank. This led to the development of the AAI T-92 light tank, armed with a 76mm gun, a low profile, and acceptable armor, yet was air portable. Several other concepts such as the T-71 got as far as wooden mock-ups. With the M41 and T-92 concept, there was a fairly effective selection of light tanks. However, later doctrine changes required such a vehicle to be both air-portable and amphibious, and still have the firepower and protection to meet equal threats on the battlefield. This was hastened by the arrival of the Soviet PT-76 light tank that packed a much more powerful gun in terms of penetration, and was fully amphibious and air-portable, being sold in Zerg-like numbers to every third world country with loose change to spare. This killed off the T-92, which lacked amphibious capability, which was due to its small size not generating enough buoyancy without adding extra air tanks to the side. The M41 did try to adapt, and eventually a prototype was tested with a 90mm, then a 152mm gun in the form of the T-49 tank, but it didn't meet expectations, although aspects of it were later used on the Sheridan. Thus, the requirement for an armored reconnaissance and airborne assault vehicle was put in place in July 1959 to rival the PT-76's capabilities. 12 companies vied for the contract, each designing their own concepts and design, but the winning tender went to Cadillac in 1960 as the XM551. The vehicle had undergone several changes and concepts during development, with weapons ranging from the 76mm M32 gun to a 105mm M62 gun, as well as a 105mm howitzer. However, the weapon chosen at the end was the 152mm gun launcher XM81, which fired either conventional munitions or the Shillelagh anti-tank guided missile, which was also being developed for the T-95 medium tank, and later on, the M60A2 and MBT-70 program. The new vehicle which entered service was amphibious, albeit with screens, thus requiring preparation, and was air-portable, while its large weapon system was in theory able to tackle all vehicles and infantry. However, it wasn't a hugely successful design. The US fell into the usual quandary of fiscal issues once again, with costs rising well beyond expected budgets, and development figures rose to over $1.3 billion. Its service career was marred as well. In order to keep the weight low, the hull was made of aluminum, and while this can work effectively in the right volume, it was simply too thin for the task at hand, offering no protection from much more than light rifle fire. Anti-tank mines were almost always fatal. There are also many rumors of the aluminum hull burning, but that's not actually factual. The metal will melt, but will only burn if ignited by magnesium. Detractors would see the melted holes and assume the metal caught fire, and so the misinformation was able to spread. Another major issue was the fact that its gun occasionally ignited rounds while still chambered, due to the air flushing system failing, and the recoil was so fierce it would gouge out a careless gunner's eye. Coupled with the armor issues mentioned, that made it less than loved. It was not all doom and gloom for the Sheridan, however. The 152mm flechette rounds were superb for sweeping the forest of Charlie, and the HE round would demolish just about anything it touched, when it worked. The second round, the Shillelagh anti-tank guided missile, was never issued in time. Post-war, its reputation never really improved, and it was seldom used. During the United States invasion of Panama in 1989, 14 M551s were deployed. 10 were dropped by air, with 2 of them destroyed when they crashed into the ground. Yet they soldiered on, more so as the US didn't really have anything to replace them. They served as OPFOR training vehicles for a while, disguised as Russian tanks. The last action of the Sheridans was in the Gulf War. 55 tanks were sent. Despite being obsolete, they performed basic scouting duties and did manage to fire off 6 Shillelagh missiles, which had little effect. These were the only missile of the type used in anger, 6 out of over 88,000 made. Today's Sheridans can be found in museums and collections, as well as the odd storage yard. A sad end to an interesting but flawed design. This vehicle is at the National Armor and Cavalry Collection at Fort Benning in Georgia, and it's outfitted to the way it would have been back in Vietnam. Sources for today's video include R.P. Hunnicutt's published work, History of the American Light Tank, a published work by Stephen Zaloga called M551 Sheridan, U.S. Armor Magazine, January-February 1977 edition, and alfed.org, the Aluminum Federation. Like and subscribe if you dug it, and let me know in the comments what vehicle you want to see next. I'll see you next time! Thanks for watching!